G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I was just going for a bit of a drive, making a completely different video, when, as you can see by the wheel tracks, I managed to allow my attention to waver, and thereby I encountered a sharp rock, to wit, that one there. And yeah, well, it got me. Therefore, thus, and because on my white and brown foot, I'm walking back to the hut. Because, as it happens, in the changing over of the vehicles, my toolbox moved from the one to the other, my wheel brace moved from the one to the other, and the jack's winding handle moved from the one to the other. And so, therefore, thus and because, I get to walk from about the middle of my place, pretty much, you know, all the way back to the hut. As Margaret Thatcher used to say, Tina, 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 there is no alternative. It's a bit like sitting out here, paying rates on an endangered species sanctuary, trying to increase the biomass and the biodiversity just by refraining from indulging in any kind of commercially oriented activity, on the grounds that, you know, this place came into production about the time of the gold boom, maybe a bit before. The other side of this hill, it was called, once upon a time, back in the day, it was called Bald Knob, because when you stood on top of what was known as Martin's Lookout, immediately to the east of Glen Innes Township, if you looked to the north, in a sea of forest-covered hills, this, the far side of that ridge up there, that was the only cleared area in sight from 8 or 10 miles away. Therefore, it was known as Bald Knob. But years spooled by, and a fella called Bert Hinkler landed at Glen Innes, took them there for a joyride, and he disappeared out of sight going north from Glen Innes, and he thought the same as the people who put the power line through. He followed the lowest line of the country, and therefore in 1928 Bald Knob was renamed Hinkler Hill. So I'm paying rates on the northwest ridge of Hinkler Hill. Technically, more or less, according to the map and the history, you know, you can go and look that one up. At the time, Bert Hinkler had just flown solo from England to Australia, and he was flavour of the month. He was a personal acquaintance of my grandfather, to the tune of last time Bert Hinkler was in Australia, he had dinner at my grandparents' house. Gave my oldest maternal auntie a dog, which was inevitably called Hinky. So it was considered an item of some curiosity within a few of the family that I finished up buying a block of land that was called Hinkler Hill. So anyway, here I am paying rates on the endangered species sanctuary, and you know, like, you can kind of see the boundary line between me and the next door neighbour. He's an apiarist who sometimes has some cows and sometimes has some cattle, but his main interest is in bees. So that's probably some of the most lightly impacted countryside there is in Australia in terms of grazing country in the New England tablelands. The place off the other side of me, after 26 years, it changed hands. And it's being actively managed by its owner rather than the owner living a long way away and paying a manager. And the very first thing the new bloke did was give it a rest for about 3 months and then put a very tiny number of sheep on and then gradually boost them up to be almost 20% perhaps of what the place used to carry under the old regime. And then he added some cattle. So yeah, it's under much more careful management than I've ever seen it before. But it's very, very weird having spent 26 years trying to increase the biomass and the biodiversity of one little 100-acre patch of the skin of planet Earth on the grounds that that's clearly, obviously, the task facing humanity. And then sit back here and watch while there's a wave of sort of neo-fascist right-wing populism, hyper-patriotic nationalism sweeping the world. From Hansonism in Australia to the Trumpletons of Norte Armed Americano. And in France, there's Marine Le Pen. In Holland, the Netherlands, there's a bloke called Gilders. And when you look into it, Gilders, the bloke who absolutely hates outlanders, Wheatlanders, can't stand anybody who's not a proper white Saxon Nordic Dutchman. He's married to a Hungarian and his mother is half Indonesian. Javanese? I don't know, Balinese? I mean, Indonesia was a Dutch colonial possession for like 400 years. There were some Dutch East Indians or Indonesians, depending on your time frame of reference and your idea of political correctness. There were some who actually got to go back. Sort of like Vietnamese and half Vietnamese who got to go back to France after France, accepted that Dien Bien Phu meant the end of French Indochina. So yeah, this white supremacist Dutchman is actually an Asiatic Dutchman married to a Hungarian, and I think the DNA evidence suggests that most Hungarians are pretty much descended from the Mongol hordes. So difficult to see how he justifies his beliefs and statements and positions to himself in lieu or in light of his own heritage, DNA, background, breeding, pedigree. But anyway, yeah, the guilty flee where none pursue, me think he doth protest too much. And it seems that Tronel Dump's Secretary of the Environment, a fellow called Pruitt, whose pastime used to be suing the Environmental Protection Agency for attempting to protect the environment, he's now declared that carbon dioxide emissions are not proved to be connected to the global warming, that he can't deny that global warming's happening. He just now refuses to accept the connection between humanity discovering industrial means of burning coal. I mean, medieval means of burning coal were bad enough, but it takes about 4 tons of coal and 2 tons of iron ore to make 1 ton of steel. It takes 40 acres of forest to make the charcoal to make 1 tonne of steel. So yeah, medieval coal burning was a happening thing ever since the Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age, pretty much. But when the English coal miners found that they could use a steam engine running on their third grade crappiest coal, which they got for free, they had to dig it out of the ground in order to collect the really good stuff that they could sell. So they ran their coal-fired steam engines on free fuel. They bootstrapped the entire coal-fired, steam-powered industrial revolution. And it's totally clear that the chemists of the day noticed the change in the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide from 250 parts per million to 270. They talked about it. They said, if this keeps going on, we're going to cook the world. And everybody said, yes, yes, yes. That's very interesting. And by the 1970s, even the most dim-witted right-wing neo-Nazi politicians had decided we've got to do something about it. Like Nixon started taking clear definitive action against anthropogenic greenhouse gas-induced global warming. Nixon. The sort of neo-fascist bad boy of the right wing of the Republican Party. And now, as I walks me into my clearing, we live in a world where 7,500 nuclear warheads and their delivery systems lie in Donald Trump's hands. Tronal dump. This is the dawning of the age of the Trumpletons. The age of the Trumpletons. And global warming will crush Tronal dump. And all of the Trumpletons will be trampled on by the consequences of their actions. They've unleashed a crew of madmen. If you accept the fact that the Earth is the smallest biosphere that's known to be big enough to support a sufficiently rich ecology to allow a sapient industrial civilization and society to arise. If you can just imagine that you're living on a spaceship, an intergenerational spaceship, traveling between the stars, and there's a power plant, there's an air and water recycling system, and there's a sort of sewage into food regeneration system, and it's all automatic. And suddenly some of the crew decides that they want to cut down the air recyclers and dig up the food and water recyclers, or the sewage into food water recyclers, and they want to burn the air conditioning plant in order to melt the food and water recycling plant so they can make jewelry because that's shiny, and then they want to sell that to each other and call themselves rich. Okay, well, that happened here on planet Mudball 10,300 years ago at a place called Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And the cult of harvest everythingism was born. And the first ever wild gathered harvested seeds were dropped in a midden, and they grew up and they hybridized. And we got man-made grain, which was then deliberately sown, and everything was harvested. And as sad as it is to say, what the world needs now is for the global village and its international economic trade routes and its markets and its market demand to be shut down. And Donald Trump is the most disruptive factor to occur on the world stage since Hitler tried to invade Stalin. For 75, 77 years, the cleverest bureaucrats and diplomats and economists on the face of the planet have tried to stop everything from going to shit. And this is what we've got. What the world needs now is Tronal dump. This is the dawning of the age of the Trumpletons, the age of the Trumpletons, the trampled on and all the Trumpletons will be trampled on as global warming crushes Trundle Dump. Warbles on, let the YouTube. Ciao.